So, of course, yesterday was the recall race and the recall election, I should say, in California.
Right.
It was a big no for Larry Elder. I would say Larry Elder kind of helped save Gavin Newsom. To be honest with you, at this point, 70% has been reported, and 63.9% of people voted no on Gavin Newsom being recalled in California. And I want to play a clip of Larry Elder in his concession speech. Listen to this.
We recognize that we lost the battle, but we are certainly going to win the war. We are forcing them now to pay attention to the problem of homelessness. We are forcing them now to do a better job on schools. We are forcing them now to do a better job.
Just stop. Whatever. So here's the thing I want to chop it up with y'all about. And of course, feel free to call in 866-801-8255. Y'all may know that I've done a lot of work writing about Black Republicans, Black conservatives. And I do have this theory that if you are a Black conservative or a Black Republican, you can get pretty far. You could, get a multi-million-dollar book deal. You can maybe get on Fox News immediately, no matter what your record shows. And of course, there are folks who've been in office like a Tim Scott, Clarence Thomas, of course, our Supreme Court Justice. There's folks throughout history. But I'm seeing a bit of a trend here, y'all. I'm seeing this reality of the false hope of the Black conservative. Let's think about John James in Michigan. He lost. Kimberly Klacik in Maryland. She lost. Angela Stanton King, who was terrible, in Georgia, lost. Wesley Hunt in Texas lost. Larry Elder now lost. Herschel Walker, I think, is going to be next. It's really interesting that maybe, being in the sunken place is profitable in some ways, but it may not translate to votes, even in conservative areas. Really fascinating. So I want to know, Dr. Jason Johnson, what are your thoughts on we're seeing a lot of these Black conservatives thinking that they're the great Black hope, and the answer is they're not.
So first, Clay, I got to say this. I'll start with the Republican thing, then I'll go straight to California. I had a great conversation about this actually on my podcast on Slate with Michael Steele. And you know Michael Steele, former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, Black Republican, former RNC chair. And Michael laid it out. I mean, Michael, he's a wonderful mentor. I love this guy to death. But he said, look, Allen West in Texas, Herschel Walker in Georgia, Larry Elder in California, most of these guys are not credible candidates, right? And years ago, the crazy Black Republican was always, say, Alan Keyes. You remember they would run Alan Keyes everywhere in the country. They just need a Black guy. But they got into this sort of notion of, well, if we run this Black person, that'll peel off some of the Black vote. And if they say enough racist stuff, they'll still be able to get the white conservative vote. It doesn't work that way. In fact, Larry Elder is the quintessential example that should abolish anyone ever suggesting again that Black people vote for somebody just because of the color of their skin. He did terrible with Black people, just like Herschel Walker would do terrible with Black people. You have to actually be a somewhat substantive candidate. And so I think what has happened is a lot of mainline conservative Republicans, conservative Black Republicans, left the party. I wrote about this years ago at another outlet. I used to call them the Suicide Squad. There was Orlando Brown, a couple other guys, the Black Republicans who all left the party when Trump won the nomination because they were like, I can't go back to Michigan and say I work for this guy. So the party is now left with the grifters like Candace Owens and Diamond and Silk and all these other people who aren't really credible Republicans. They're just people who want to, increase their profile. This has been great advertising for Larry Elder.
And the funny thing is, they raised tons of money. Yeah. Larry Elder, he raised an enormous amount of money. So did John James in Michigan. They're raising tons of money, but y'all gotta, again, folks think we just vote for folks because they're Black. It's just, it's just not. And plenty of Black Democrats have lost as well too. Yes. So, Amisha, your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. I agree with everything that Dr. Jason Johnson just said. I would add, though, that it's not that there aren't Black conservatives. I think all of us know Black conservatives exist. Black people are not a monolith. What the issue happens to be that the Republican Party seems to not understand is that Black people don't just vote on race. And at the end of the day, if you choose a Black Republican and you elevate a Black Republican who's not speaking to the issues, the values, the substance that Black voters are looking towards, then you're going to essentially have the same problem over and over again. The Republican Party keeps choosing Black candidates to run and to fundraise for who are literally just like mini Trumps, or they are extreme right. They're people who would have a hard time even getting a lot of white Republicans on board. And it's interesting because they consistently use the exact same playbook in terms of the language that these people use. Larry Elder being a great example. He was someone who spoke out loudly and proudly against Black Lives Matter, basically labeled them as terrorists. He was somebody who talked about slaveholders actually deserving reparations. He was someone who went as far on the crazy side as he possibly could, and then still expected to get Black people trotting out for him. And I think, like you said, Clay, we're going to see the same instance in Georgia, considering the Black people they've chosen to actually, hoist up and stand behind. But the issue here is that the Republican Party still has a very strong issue with understanding how to message to Black people. But in a lot of these races, they're just not going to be competitive anyway. But with that being said, there's also a failure of understanding why I think that there are a lot of Black people who consistently vote a certain way. And part of that isn't because, Black people are always in lockstep with the Democratic Party, as much as it is the Democratic Party speaks to the ideals, the values of Black people, be it whether it is environmental issues, whether it is social issues, whether it is housing, these issues that matter to a large swath of the Black community. And you're hearing time and time again, Republicans take a very sharp turn when it comes to these. In California, for instance, we know that the issue of COVID-19 was a huge one, and it played very largely in this election cycle, specifically around the emergence of the Delta variant. And we know that Black people are being affected at the highest rates. Black people are dying at the highest rates. Black people are the most likely to be uninsured or underinsured in this country, or have consistently worked jobs that didn't provide them health insurance. So speaking negatively about the impact of COVID-19 and trying to act as though it's not a real thing is not going to work for any candidate, whether they are a Black Republican or a white Republican. It's just not going to be a good sell for Black people.
But, Dr. Johnson, let me ask you this. That's a really interesting point you bring up, Amisha, about not speaking to Black issues, these Black conservatives, Black Republicans, right? That's a good point. But I got to ask this question, Jason. Can you be a Black Republican and speak to Black issues? At this point, the Republican Party, to me, is the white nationalist party. I think Mia Love attempted to do it, if you want to call it an attempt, and she was out, and I don't like Mia Love at all. But, yeah. I know they say, listen, I think Condoleezza Rice was deplorable, and she still made some really bizarre comments about race recently during the Trump era. And I still stand by Colin Powell. I don't care what you say. He knew he was a tool to put lies out there to go into a war we didn't need to go into. But can you be a Black Republican and really speak to the issues of Black people? I don't know if that's possible, is it?
But Clay, see, I think that kind of misses the point, though. And I this is sort of my disagreement in the assessment that Amisha said. They're not trying anymore. They're not trying to talk to. None of this is about talking to Black people. What we have happening in this country, quite frankly, is an internal circular firing squad amongst white people. We are really just observers at this point, if you really want to be candid about it. What you see happening with white conservatives and Republicans is, I'm going to put up a Black person to talk to other conservative white people. They don't give a crap about Black voters. They're not interested in reaching out to Black voters. Talk to any Republican consultant. Their only interest in Black people is generally suppressing the Black vote. They're not interested in, it's not the 90s. It's not even the early 2000s. They don't care about that sort of thing anymore. If they can bring along Black people who are down with hyper-masculine, incredibly sexist, repressive policies that occasionally say that I'll lower your taxes, then cool. But there is no targeted plan for Black voters at all in the Republican Party. And no one in the GOP who's honest with you will say that there is. But here's where that's also important. It's not a matter of Republican Party, but the craziness of Trumpism. Look at what just happened in California. Larry Elder got the most votes of all the Republicans. He got 44% of the vote. There were qualified Republicans running. There was Falconer. The guy was the former mayor of San Diego. Did they vote for him? No. So that's what the party is right now. We have to stop pretending that there's some sane part of the GOP and a crazy part that takes over. If the majority of Republicans in California wanted to vote for a guy who said that slave masters deserve reparation, which, by the way, they tried to get, who has a history of sexual abuse and sexual harassment, that's what they want. Yes, that's what they want.
But let me just ask you. I hear you, Jason. But let me just ask you. I hear what you're saying. But let's say there's a black conservative out there listening right now, and maybe they resonate with this whole lie of small government. I don't know. Is there a way for a black Republican to not be a Herschel Walker, a Larry Elder, an Angela Stanton King, and speak to black people? Or is it impossible in the Republican Party? Is there a way to do it?
Well, there's a way you can do it, but talking to people and getting yourself elected are two different things. There are black Republicans out there that can run for a city council seat in Cleveland or Pittsburgh or Houston, Texas, and it's probably okay. But if you're trying to run statewide, if you're trying to run for a seat in Congress, if you're trying to run for anything higher than, say, county commissioner, maybe even county commissioner, you're going to encounter the current Republican base, which embraces white nationalism, doesn't believe that any Democratic voters are legitimate parts of the voting coalition, and generally see Donald Trump as the legitimate heir of the American presidency, regardless of if the majority of the country wants him. That is the Republican Party right now. So if you're running for anything other than dog catcher, you got to speak to that. And if you speak to that, black folk don't like you. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very true. I think that we have reached this epoch when it comes to the Republican Party, and not to say that they weren't or have not been for generations now very much white nationalists, but it was an undercurrent. They talked about it in more softened tones, even though their policies actually advocated for it anyway, even though they weren't out here with a bullhorn like Donald Trump was, and like many of his acolytes happen to be today. But I don't think, to Jason's point, I don't think that you can get Republican support today, largely, if you are not on the extreme fringe. And we've seen that time and time again in races across the country, where there have been some very strong Republicans who would have got elected in the 90s and possibly even the early 2000s, who don't stand a snowball's chance in hell in 2021 and beyond. And I think that speaks to where the Republican Party has gone. And I would argue to the point of no return, and to the point of fighting against their own detriment at this point, and just turning these races into basic edicts of white supremacy, and ensuring that the only people who will trot out to vote for them are those white supremacists, but also understanding that that is the core base of the party today. So it's very interesting when they do choose black people, be it male or female, to hoist up in some of these elections, because the recognition is that they have to accept these white supremacist narratives in order to even be electable or even be seen as electable amongst the Republican Party. So they're essentially swallowing and regurgitating a lot of those talking points while walking in black bodies. And they're absolutely fine with doing it. That means that they isolate black people, but it also means that they're trying their hardest to ensure that they get that white funding and that white supremacist base comes. I don't think that the resurgence of this is to get more black people on board as much as it is to make white people comfortable, or even more comfortable with their racism, by sticking a black person out in front.
Why do y'all think Tim Scott resonates so much? I think he's going to be reelected in 2022. Why do you think Tim Scott has the magic touch, Jason?
Well, because he fits South Carolina. I mean, and South Carolina is not a progressive place. It's not Georgia. It's not North Carolina. It's really not even Tennessee. It's not a place that is, growing in population. South Carolina isn't getting like a whole bunch of Midwesterners and Northeasterners moving in there, but he's a black man who sort of speaks to a subservience to the existing order, right? He's not going to rock the boat. He's not going to offend white people. There has always been, it's not new. There has always been a strand within racist white supremacist thinking in America of finding good blacks. That's not new. There's always been this belief of like, we will find this one person, we let this person become mayor, we let this person become judge, because that's how we tell ourselves that we're not bigots. We will occasionally prosecute this individual for setting fire to a black church because that was a good black church. They weren't rabble rousers, so we're going to hold that white man accountable. So Tim Scott is the exception. And you notice with him being in office, he every single time has done absolutely nothing to promote policies that would benefit not just black people, but Democratic voters and the poor in South Carolina in general. He doesn't do anything on voting rights. He doesn't want to do anything on police accountability. He doesn't want to do anything about impeachment. So at the end of the day, Tim Scott is exactly what you would want in South Carolina. The difference between him and, say, a Larry Elder or even a Ben Carson is Tim Scott is not a dumb man. And Tim Scott
he has
not
credentials.
Unqualified. Yeah, he's not unqualified for his position.
Right.
But, he's not somebody I agree with. I really want to make this clear, Clay, and thank you for asking me, because I want to make this clear to the audience, because there's a lot of bad takes out there, as there always are, for people who aren't here. And I say this, I travel a lot. Sometimes I'm in Georgia, sometimes I'm in California, sometimes I'm in Maryland. I travel a lot for this kind of work. And I want people to understand what this actually looked like here. There's all these idiot hot takes out there now. They're like, well, this could have been good for Larry Elder, and the Democrats should be worried there was even a recall. It is very easy, if you have money, to put together a recall in California. All you got to do is get, I think it's like 10% of the total turnout for votes for last time, which is maybe like 1 million people, right? But notice, in California, the recall election was run by this rich businessman, Cox, who ran against Gavin Newsom in 2018 and lost, right? They tried to get the signatures. They couldn't even get the proper number of signatures for a recall, Clay. They couldn't. They missed the deadline. And then they went judge shopping throughout the state of California until they found a conservative judge who allowed them to get 4 additional months to get the signatures they needed to put together the recall. This is not popular. This was not based on some huge offense or problem that people have with Gavin Newsom. This was purely orchestrated by highly deep-pocketed Republicans who wanted to try to take him down. And also, I can say this because you talk to local politicians, and this is what they'll tell you. The plan was also to waste so much time and so much money. It is September, and Democrats have had to waste time and money and resources on a recall so that they couldn't raise money for important races that are going to have next spring and next summer. That's what this was all about. People need to understand that there was a long game involved in this. This doesn't have anything to do with the weaknesses of the Democratic Party in the state. And it wouldn't have mattered if there was somebody else more prominent than Larry Elder. At the end of the day, California is a Democratic state.
Misha, do you think, Misha, let me ask you this, though. Do you think that Republicans in Georgia are thinking, oh, Lord, maybe Herschel Walker isn't a good idea? do you think wait a minute now.
Republicans in Georgia thinking that already. Actually, national Republicans didn't really want to see that happen either, but the Trump stronghold pushed it. So they're, just biding their time at this point. To Jason's point, in California, there have been this was one recall that got a lot of national attention, obviously, because of its emphasis with the governor. But there are over 60 recalls going on in California right now. So we have to be very aware that the threshold is extremely small, but the Republicans are building towards something else. Like, at the end of the day, they are using this to basically show as a show of power, but also as one to thwart a lot of the re-election fundraising that Democrats are going to need to have going into the midterms. This recall election alone cost over $276 million. That was a lot of money to basically throw down the toilet for a race that Larry Elder didn't stand a snowball's chance in hell in from the beginning. We're talking about a state, California, where Democratic voters are registered 2-1 versus Republicans. That is a very large margin. It's one that is not replicable across the country. So I think that when we talk about hot takes and what can be applied from this race to others where Democrats are going to be facing challengers in the next year or so, there are so many differences that we really have to take into consideration first, but also that this was a race that I think Republicans knew that they could not win, but it was one where they got to nationalize and talk about a lot of these fringe elements and actually elevate Larry Elder, because a lot of people across the country didn't know who the hell he was before this race. So I think that it helped them in that sense, that now that they've got a lot more of this, constituted craziness out here in the public square. But I don't think that these types of challenges or these types of races where millions of dollars are thrown in just to, basically dissolve in the end are going to go away anytime too soon, because the action here is to try to upend the midterms as much as possible.
I will say, though, and I could have been wrong, who knows, I was a little bit concerned about this recall race before Larry Elder got in. I was a little concerned because that's how Arnold Schwarzenegger got in. Gray Davis was recalled, and Schwarzenegger gets in. So I was like, is this possible that Gavin Newsom?
Unpopular, extremely unpopular governor, and he was somebody. And you had Arnold Schwarzenegger running as a moderate. He never ran as an extremely polarizing.
He was a Hollywood Republican. I know. Yeah, you never know. I was a little bit nervous.
But here's the other thing, Clay. This is just kind of the core political science of it. It's like, because the same thing happened with Donald Trump really in 2020. If you are an incumbent, you almost never want the race. You never want an election to be a referendum on if you did a good job or a bad job. You always want the race to be about you compared to somebody else. That's what I used to say all the time going into 2020. I was like, 2020 was a referendum on Trump, and the majority of the country was like, I don't like the job that you're doing, and they kicked him out. That's the reason that he lost. If Donald Trump had run against somebody, I say this all the time, if he had run against Bernie Sanders, it would have been a choice between a Democratic Socialist and Donald Trump, and Trump would have gotten reelected. That's what happened in California. When the race was, do we like
the Bernie Bros are going to call, Jason? The Bernie Bros are going to call in about 5 seconds. Go ahead, brother.
They're free to do so, but that was the math. That was the math. It was like if people get a choice between two things, that's how they're going to choose. If it's just, do I like this existing thing? There are very few politicians in America who average an approval rating of over, say, 55%. So if it's a referendum on you, there's always a chance that you could lose the job. Gavin Newsom was in trouble until about 3 or 4 weeks ago when enough people in California said, oh, wait a minute. It's not about whether I like Newsom. It's Newsom versus Elder. Elder's nuts. That's why he